I think you both are saying some phenomenal things. I'm taking some notes down and just, wanted to very briefly respond to a few things. I agree about, the notion of a power imbalance and the lack of localized control, and how that has bred real grievances. It's interesting. I sort of almost am reminded of the imperial era where the center would send viceroys to different regions to govern them. And that is what happened over the last 30 years, where while on paper Ethiopia was a federation, the reality was that everything went through the prime minister's office. And more importantly, everything went through the party. The party apparatus, the EPRDF apparatus, actually mattered more than the government apparatus. It was more organized, it was more tight-knit, it was more effective, actually, and largely more efficient than this centuries-old bureaucratic system that really had sort of been launched under the sort of later emperors of Johannes and Menelik and Haile Selassie. And so, and this is actually why, like, a lot of political observers would have told you under the EPRDF that if you wanted to really understand Ethiopian politics, don't follow what parliament does, but follow the annual EPRDF Congress. Because when the EPRDF meets in their Gimgama sessions, that's when you actually learn what they're thinking, as opposed to what the rubber stamp parliament would say, because all those questions were pre-canned anyways. Anyway, and so, but yeah, I mean, to the point of like perpetuating the systemic inequalities, I think it is, to Masash's and Anan's point, like, I think it is a problem of elites, regardless of what their ethnicity is. The reality is Ethiopia is 85% rural. 60% of Ethiopians don't have access to electricity. There's only 15% internet penetration. Somalia, which has been in anarchy since 1991, has better internet penetration than Ethiopia, which is just blows my mind. And so, I think the reality is that poor is poor is poor, regardless of sort of where they are. And even sort of in the Tigrayan context, one of my biggest issues with the TPLF was always that they really had sort of assumed Tigrayan support in many ways over the last 3 decades. There was sort of this, don't forget what we did for you type of like Stockholm syndrome type, where, and I, if I can say, I see it in Eritrea as well with Isaias, where it's like, hey, like, I'm the one that liberated you, like, don't question me. And it's like, well, great, like, thank you for unseating Mengistu and, whatever, and thank you for some of the infrastructural gains and whatnot, but what's next? Like, can we be more forward-looking than sort of a continuous relitigation of the past? And I'd seen that, I mean, in the United States, this is one of the grievances that I have as a proud Democrat. This is one of the grievances I have with the Democratic Party, where the Democrats assume the support of Black people without actually providing any concrete agenda as to why they're better than, I mean, we know you're not openly racist like Republicans are, but like, what else? So, and again, I'm not comparing the political context of both countries. I'm saying it in the sense of the assumption of support. And the sort of otherization of if it's not us, then this group, whoever the other is going to eat you alive or whatever. And so I think that's been an issue. I agree with Ayantu. I think the Oromo elites are incredibly problematic, but that has been the case for a lot of the ethnic elites and true throughout Ethiopian history. Again, sort of when you are centering power in the center, when you are drawing authority from one source, you are going to sort of be more loyal to the source than your own people. And so we've seen that in Ethiopian history, and this power imbalance. I think part of the reason why part of the reason why I think some of the things over the last 2-3 decades have worked well was just sort of this emphasis on infrastructure development and whatnot. I think when people have basic infrastructure, because I think we can't forget also that housing, shelter, medicine, these things are basic human rights as well. It's not just political freedoms. So I think really intently focusing on that and focusing on poor rural Ethiopians is going to be sort of the way to move forward. And this is actually one of, and I'll stop after this because I could go on this, but one of the biggest criticisms I've had with Abiy is sort of this insane focus on vanity projects. like billions of US dollars that are being raised and spent on public parks in Addis Ababa for God knows what reason. And and millions of dollars that has been spent on upgrading government offices. Literally, I mean, the prime minister comes in and within the first few months is dropping money. Some say it was funded by the UAE. I'm not entirely sure. To do a complete makeover of the prime minister's office. It looks like a sterilized clinic, basically, all white walls and just just weird. But anyway, and some of these government offices, they look fancier than hotels even. And so it's just, misplaced priorities where, yeah, I understand you do need to beautify. I mean, Addis is the capital of Africa. How it appears is important. I'm not going to deny that. But I think when you are creating an order of precedence in terms of priorities, most Ethiopians are in the middle of nowhere. And if you're not investing in them, you are actually perpetuating their economic and political subjugation. And so that really did annoy me, this overemphasis of tree planting and overemphasis of building parks and creating documentaries to show off all the imperial era cars. Like, no one cares about that. Like if Ethiopians can't eat 3 times a day, and to his credit, when Meles came in 1991, he was asked by diplomats and journalists sort of like, what is your goal here? And he did say that he wanted Ethiopians to eat 3 times a day, and that he would sort of measure his success based off of that. Obviously, there's much to be said there, and there still are Ethiopians who are not eating 3 times a day. But I really do think that is still a standard that we need to hold Ethiopian elites and Ethiopian officials to. Unless Ethiopians are eating 3 times a day, unless they have clean water, access to electricity, access to basic services, and things that we just take for granted here in the United States, then what are we really talking about when we talk about freedoms? Because economic freedoms and infrastructure is as important as free speech and free freedom of the press. And I would argue that that's probably true also for Eritrea. I'd love to hear our Eritrean brothers chime in on that as well.
No, I mean, that was so informative. It was great to listen to. Just very, very quickly, I'll say in Eritrea, besides obviously everything with the regime, from an economic perspective, I think of it in terms of 3 W's: water, waste, and Wi-Fi. Like those 3 things, obviously food as well. So if you come up with a good W for food, but those 3 things are just like, you're speaking about the lack of internet penetration throughout Ethiopia. I mean, Eritrea has the world's worst internet in the entire world, right? The worst internet in the entire world. You can't get Wi-Fi at all. I've had some interesting encounters with people in Niala Hotel, where you go there at 6 a.m. before anyone has gone to the hotel to get onto the Wi-Fi, because once there's more than 3 people, it's going to take you, 3 hours to scroll through one Instagram post. But yeah, so water, waste, and Wi-Fi for me.
Yeah, I was just happy to be able to listen to you guys answer that question. That was really more so, I think, for the Ethiopian perspective. You know what I mean? Nothing has changed under either regime for us, right? We still got dictators house folk, either way we look at it. Yeah, and I have one quick question. I know we gotta kind of get close to wrapping up. We got a couple more questions we want to dive into, so I hope this doesn't open up a whole can of worms. But for Ayatollah, I was just wondering, like, the level of violence that we've seen targeted towards the Oromo people, like months before this war started. Do you feel like there was that similar level? Like you talked about this, there was the same level of dominance of Oromo land and Oromo rights under each regime, but was there that level of violence that there is now under Abiy, or not?
This is a difficult question. I think that there was a time during the EPRDF era when Oromos literally could not really gather in a small group of more than 5 people. Like, their daily lives were very much policed and militarized, and so militarization has always been part of life, and also violence as governance. It's like it's as ordinary as, it's a very, very strong component of how Oromo territories are governed. I think that the swiftness with which Abiy Ahmed's government has gone after Oromo protesters and anybody seen as even potentially, not just like literal opponents, but potential opponents have been killed, have been jailed. Western Oromia has basically been blockaded for over a year now, and there hasn't been internet. So I mean, I feel like it's very hard for me to say one was better or worse, or, but I think that the intensity of the violence is probably as bad or worse than some of the worst EPRDF years. When my friends I can always tell by how bad things are by like how much people are willing to talk over the phone, like, and what they'll say. And my father returned from Ethiopia and he brought back really horrible stories. But basically, Oromia is as default now a militarized zone. People are afraid to even visit their relatives in jail. The mass level of incarceration we saw this summer. An Oromo artist was killed. He was much beloved, and that was used as a pretext to imprison thousands of people. So we're talking upwards of 20,000 people, and I'm being conservative with that figure. And we had schools converted into jails. So, I mean, but the thing is, I really don't want to exceptionalize the violence against the Oromo, because what makes the Oromo different is where they're at geographically within the Ethiopian state. They're at the center. The state's focus is often on them as a problem. So there's that way in which violence targets the Oromo specifically, but the Ethiopian state has always been violent, like exceptionally violent to all of its people. I mean, like we've had genocide in the Ogaden. There's just been like so much violence, and recently all the violence we've seen in Oromia, in Benishangul Gumuz against Amharas and other ethnic communities remain unaddressed. And each time there was a violence, the government weaponized it to go after its opponent, whether it was Ola or whoever at the moment needed to be put down. So yeah, things are really bad in Oromia. So it's, yeah. I guess the one thing that makes it worse, that potentially makes it worse, is that under EPRDF, with the establishment of the multinational federal system, which the Oromo fought for, people felt like at least they gained something, which was, for the first time, people can go to school using their native languages. And there was this legal recognition that a people named Oromo exist, which had been stripped from them through the conquest. Now it appears that we're moving backwards. So potentially this regime could be worse, or is worse. I'm trying to be very conservative about this, because I think not all the Oromo, especially of the elite kind, see yet what they're doing. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Just to very quickly chime on, to add on to that, I think, so starting on the Oromo elite part, I think part of that, and this is not unique to Oromo elites, I think this is unique, this is a very characteristic of all the elites in Ethiopia, is that, and the reason why I keep saying that Prosperity Party, PP in many ways is EPRDF 2.0, is because you have these elites of different ethnicities who are sycophants, and they will sort of go with the wind, whichever way the wind blows, right? So if the wind for nearly 3 decades was the TPLF, so that's sort of where you go, and it's so, I mean, I think it's rich that some of the people who are on these news articles that are in these news articles and news video segments and whatnot, talking about the sort of criminal clique, this junta that exists. It's not junta, it's junta, but no government official apparently knows how to pronounce that. Is just it's rich that these are the people who perpetrated serious atrocities. I mean, anything that the TPLF is guilty of, then starting with Abiy Ahmed himself, was the co-founder and director general of the Information Network Security Agency, Ethiopia's cyber intelligence agency. Ethiopia has three main security chiefs: the head of cyber intelligence, the head of the National Intelligence and Security Service, NIS, and then the head of the federal police. These are sort of the three core security chiefs. In 2018, we actually saw the United States placed global Magnitsky sanctions on Getachew Assefa, who is a Tigrayan and was the head of NIS, the Director General of NIS. I mean, this guy is so seclusive. There is no photo. There is like literally no verified photo of Getachew Assefa. No one knows what he looks like. But this guy was sort of at the head of the security apparatus, at the helm of it. Workene, the head of federal police, is now roaming freely as the executive secretary of IGAD. And he was most recently Ethiopia's foreign minister, or I guess 2 foreign ministers ago. Ethiopia has gone through 3 foreign ministers in 2 years. And then Abiy, who was head of cyber intelligence, who was the guy responsible for bugging everyone's phone and bugging everyone's internet and repression and shutting off telecoms and all that stuff, somehow remade himself as a saint. And so and really, I mean, all these people, including Redwan Hussein and others, are the problem. And so if you're going to really talk about justice and sort of moral authority, even Haile Mariam Desalegn in his article in Foreign Policy a little over a week ago, I thought was really rich. I mean, he was chairman of the EPRDF and prime minister of Ethiopia, numerous states of emergency under him. I mean, the Oromo protest movement began under him. We saw how he and his government responded to those protests over 4 years. I mean, give me a break here. Like, no one has moral superiority in Ethiopia. That's a joke. I mean, and the West knows that too. I mean, so it's like, I don't know who you're trying to convince here, but I think sometimes Ethiopians try so hard to like convince each other of who's evil, and it's like look, there's a structural problem here. Everyone is to blame in many respects. And I would just say in closing that I think I actually think that Abiy is worse than the EPRDF for especially the TPLF for Oromos, just because the one thing that the TPLF and the OLF and really sort of most Ethiopians really did agree on was the necessity of a multinational federation to keep the country intact. The problem was that was never actually materialized. Again, all power remained in the prime minister's office, although on paper, and yeah, I mean, you can ask some of the more veteran Oromo politicians, Bulcha Demeksa and Merera Gudina and others, will tell you that too. At least they agreed in principle of what needed to be done, the implementation of which didn't fully happen. But this particular government wants to sort of, I like how we're using the term "make Ethiopia great again" now, and it's really sort of this reversal of the politics of the past, which did not work, and it led us to 1974 and it led us to 1991. So why are we trying to go back to that as opposed to try to move forward and stop relitigating the past, but find a way that's equitable? And I don't think any of these actors actually reflect the future of Ethiopia in terms of the inclusivity that's needed to keep this country together. And the longer we delay this, the more likely it is that the country is going to fragment, and that will be a Pandora's box that leads to even greater instability. And then just the very last thing, I think, because Abiy is part Oromo, the narrative over the last 2 years has been, oh, the Oromos have political power now, so everything must be okay. And now it's just these disgruntled youth who just don't know how to shut up. Like that's part of the narrative where it's like, no, I mean, you got your guy in power now, like leave us alone. And that's not true. And as we know, you don't have to look like me to represent me. You don't have to look like me to govern me. You do need to share my values, though. You need to share my principles. And what we saw in 2018 was an Oromo prime minister who came in, and everyone thought, you know, the whole world was going to be great after that, when in reality, we all looked the other way in many ways, and we looked the other way this summer when what he did there is what he's trying to do now in Tigray. And so the only difference is that Tigray, between the Tigray Special Forces and TPLF's own militia, they have military might that Oromia did not have to resist Abiy's encroachments.